Hi, I'm David Miller, and I'm here with the fourth in a series of 5 mini-lectures on Philip Pullman's novel, The Golden Compass. Today's lecture, Svalbard. This is a real place. You can look it up. It's an archipelago in the Arctic Sea, about halfway between Norway and the North Pole. In Pullman, it's the stronghold of the Panzerbjörne, the race of armored bears. Part 3 contains 6 chapters, and they break down into 2 movements of 3 chapters each. The first movement, which we'll cover today, features Iorek Byrnesson's return to his throne in Svalbard, while the second, which we'll talk about next time, reveals Lord Asriel's grand ambition to launch a pathway through the Northern Lights into another universe. Chapter 18 features 2 conversations that take place aboard Lee Scoresby's balloon as the witches pull it towards Svalbard. First, there is a conversation between Lee Scoresby and the witch Serafina Pekkala. Scoresby, who didn't sign on for combat duty when the Egyptians hired him, wants to know just what he's getting himself into. Serafina Pekkala tells him there is a great war coming, and she repeats the prophecies we've heard earlier about Lyra's destiny. I mentioned last time that Lyra has to be kept in ignorance of certain facts, and apparently the witches, for all their powers of prophecy, are similarly limited in what they can foresee. Lyra is carrying something of immense value, and it seems that the fates are using her as a messenger to take it to her father. So she came all this way to find her friend, not knowing that her friend was brought to the north by the fates in order that she might follow and bring something to her father. That's how you read it, huh? For the first time, the witches seem unsure. That is how it seems, but we can't read the darkness, Mr. Scoresby. It is more than possible that I might be wrong. Serafina isn't wrong as things fall out, but there is a big piece missing from what she sees, and it's the same piece Lyra fails to grasp. This is the ignorance we keep hearing about. There is a curious prophecy about this child. She is destined to bring about the end of destiny, but she must do so without knowing what she is doing, as if it were her nature and not her destiny to do it. If she's told she must do it, it will all fail. So there is a limit to Lyra's ability to control her story, and it's a limit set by what Serafina Pekkala calls the fates. The limited knowledge we've been talking about appears again in the conversation between Lyra and Serafina. The witch knows that Lord Asriel wants to build a bridge between 2 worlds, and she knows that he needs something in order to do that. But not what. Lyra thinks it must be her alethiometer. She believes this is why the master of Jordan College entrusted it to her. Lyra is wrong on both counts. This is the point at which she fails to read her own story correctly. We'll get back to this, but for now let's notice that the conversation turns to witches. They feel the cold, but it doesn't harm them. They live for hundreds of years. They mate with mortal men, but then have to watch them die. Serafina tells Lyra the story of her own love for Farder Coram. They talk about demons, why people have them, why animals don't. And this leads to talk about Iorek Byrnesson, because the Panzerbjörne have armor instead of demons. Serafina tells Lyra that Iorek would be king of the bears if he weren't banished, and she describes the king who replaces him, Iofur Raknison. She also explains what Iorek's crime was, and they talk about whether bears can be tricked, all of which is crucial information, preparing Lyra for the challenge she will face on Svalbard. The chapter ends with a blast of turbulence that awakens the passengers sleeping in the gondola. Before they can regain control, they are attacked by a flock of repulsive, flesh-eating monsters called cliffghasts. In the course of the battle, Lyra is thrown overboard, landing hard but unhurt in a snowdrift on the island. The chapter closes as she is taken prisoner by 2 armored bears from the palace guard. Lyra's captors lead her into the royal palace, past grand murals slimed with bird droppings, through hallways that reek of rancid seal fat dung, blood, refuse of every sort. This description of the palace reinforces 2 points that Pullman has been slowly building up since Lyra's first encounter with Yorick. First, there is a radical difference between humans and animals, and second, there is the fact that Iofur Raknison wants to be human. The royal palace, built at his command to imitate human dwellings, illustrates this desire, even as its stinking, dung-besmeared condition demonstrates how unbridgeable the gap really is. This will prove to be the king's undoing. When Yorick fenced with Lyra, remember he showed her that she could never fake him out precisely because he is not human. Then, when Lyra reflects on the way Yorick was tricked by the men who stole his armor, Seraphina points out that when bears act like people, they can be tricked. Together, these pieces of information suggest that Iofur can be tricked precisely because of his desire to act like people. Lyra's captors place her in a dungeon cell where she meets the Regius Professor, formerly one of the king's human advisors, now a raving madman in chains. Lyra tricks him in order to find out everything he knows about Iofur Raknison. The information she learns from him is the final piece of the puzzle. With what she now knows, Lyra is able to form a plan that will trick Iofur. At this point, Lyra's powers of deception serve her well. She has gained enough information to recover a measure of control over her story, and she does this by improvising a brilliant lie that deceives the Bear King completely. Her performance is such a tour de force that Yorick gives her a new name, Lyra Silvertongue. Meanwhile, a strange feature has emerged in the narrative. Lyra is able to convince the Bear King that she is herself a demon, Yorick Byrnison's demon in fact, because the Golden Compass gives her secret knowledge about Iofur's story. He challenges her to tell him what was the first creature he ever killed, and the answer she learns from reading the compass is that it was his own father. The details of this story connect it directly to Sophocles' tragedy Oedipus Rex. But unlike the literary echoes we've seen before, this allusion remains oddly inert. Pullman is evoking the most famous ancient tragedy in Western literature, but he doesn't seem to be doing anything with the reference. This inertness becomes even more striking when we recognize that the name Yorick contains an allusion to the other most famous tragedy in the history of Western literature, Shakespeare's Hamlet. Did you happen to notice this one? The spelling is different, but the names sound the same. Yorick is named after Yorick, the court jester, whose skull Hamlet finds in a graveyard. This is one of the most famous moments from the play, Hamlet holding the skull at arm's length, musing, "Alas, poor Yorick! I knew him, Horatio." It's all very carefully worked out, but here again, the novel doesn't seem to be doing anything with the allusion. It just sits there, not really adding anything. Why would Pullman do this? Well, I too am a professor, and as H.L. Mencken once said, a professor without a theory is like a dog without fleas. My theory is that Pullman flourishes these conspicuously empty allusions to our most famous tragedies precisely in order to underline the fact that the bears are not human. To us, these are great tragedies. To the bears, such stories have no special weight or value. They're empty. Given Pullman's interest in Freud, it's probably no accident that he's chosen the 2 works of literature most central to psychoanalytic theories of human identity. Freud's most notorious theory is, of course, that of the Oedipus complex. And although he named this complex after the play by Sophocles, he worked it out initially as an interpretation of Shakespeare's Hamlet. Pullman goes straight to these 2 literary landmarks, which epitomize the unconscious forces of the human psyche, and empties them of meaning. It is an odd but effective way of emphasizing that the armored bears don't possess the one thing that would make these stories into powerful myths for them. Call it the soul or call it the unconscious. On Svalbard, It just isn't there. These literary allusions are the equivalent of the murals on the palace walls, stained with bird droppings. Chapter 20 describes the hand-to-hand combat between Iofur and Iorek. At the turning point in the battle, when Iorek seems only moments from defeat and death, he turns the tables. Iorek was moving backward, only to find clean, dry footing and a firm rock to leap up from. And the useless left arm was really fresh and strong. You could not trick a bear, but as Lyra had shown him, Iofur did not want to be a bear. He wanted to be a man, and Iorek was tricking him. Once Iorek has killed Iofur, we get a striking confirmation of his powerfully non-human nature. There was one ritual yet to perform. Iorek sliced open the dead king's unprotected chest, peeling the fur back to expose the narrow white and red ribs like the timbers of an upturned boat. Into the rib cage Iorek reached, and he plucked out Iofur's heart, red and steaming, and ate it there in front of Iofur's subjects. The chapter ends with Lyra reading the alethiometer by the light of a burning branch. She warns Iorek that Mrs. Coulter is approaching with a regiment of Tartars, hoping to take over Svalbard and prevent Lord Asriel's experiment. And she puzzles once again over what it is that Lord Asriel needs, because Mrs. Coulter wants to prevent him from obtaining it. Either Lyra's powers as a reader are failing her, or the dust is holding out on her. Probably it's a little of both. She thinks that what Lord Asriel needs is the alethiometer, but she also knows that isn't what the Golden Compass is telling her. The chapter ends with Lyra deciding that she must take the alethiometer to Lord Asriel. Exhausted, she falls asleep, and then Iorek gathers a squad of armored bears to take her north with Roger to find Lord Asriel before Mrs. Coulter arrives. Next time, we'll see how the Golden Compass ends.